Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Strong Community Select Committee meeting. It's Wednesday, the 6th of October, and my name is Sheila Woodhat. I'm the chair of this committee. Appreciate you all giving up your time to join us today. We've got quite a big agenda, so I'd like to start with apologies for absence.
I don't have any, Chair.
No, it doesn't appear to be any, thank you. That's good. Should have a full house in that case. Do we have any declarations of interest? If not, I can take them as and when, if that would be helpful.
I may have some, Chair, but it's just general, working for an Iron Bevan and being part of the Flying Start project, but I think I'm okay.
All right, thank you, Councillor Geppy. We'll note that if anything crops up. Nothing for the public open forum. So we have the COVID pandemic review, which is going to be introduced by, it's been put together by Emma Davis. It's been a huge report. It covers a vast area, all that's been happening to us throughout this pandemic. So I thank you for this report, Emma. There's a lot of detail in it, but we've all been living through this period and we all know that a lot of work has gone on. It would be impossible to just put every detail in this report. So I appreciate the way you've done it as well. It's quite easy to read and follow through, and you've given some examples. But appreciate that all the chief officers, there's many officers here, including chief officers, who are willing to give us some feedback along the way if members have questions. But I'll leave you to introduce it now, Emma. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, all. This report has been prepared to provide committee members with an update of activity and progress made against the commitments in the Council's coronavirus strategic aims. In March 2020, the coronavirus pandemic caused an unprecedented amount of disruption when a full UK lockdown was announced. Our focus as a council turned to preserving life and preventing the spread of the virus, whilst at the same time maintaining essential services to support our communities. We therefore needed to reduce focus on some of our corporate plan commitments to redirect capacity, and as a result, Cabinet approved a series of strategies known as the Plan on a Page to provide direction over the various stages of the pandemic. This report summarises some of this activity under the core aims of each of the strategy iterations, which includes the swift restoration of the decision-making process via considerable adaptation to our working practices, huge adjustments in our schools, initially to provide childcare facilities for vulnerable children and the children of key workers, followed by the implementation of distance learning and the development of a new process for determining student grades following the cancellation of examinations. Setting up a system to quickly deploy grants and to provide support and guidance for businesses in our area. The establishment of a test, trace and protect system that to date has successfully followed up on 100% of eligible COVID-19 cases. And finally, setting up platforms to help the incredible volunteers in our county to provide support and a way of connecting those offering assistance with those needing it. As a council, we've acted at pace over the past 18 months. Some new services have been established and we have made rapid changes to how others have been delivered. Some of these changes have made a positive impact on service delivery and as such are being retained into the future, such as booking appointments at household waste recycling centres and the request and collect system in our libraries, remote meetings for our decision-making process, allowing members to balance their workloads and their family commitments more effectively, and the extensive work underway in the active travel arena to support increased levels of walking and cycling seen during lockdown periods. We are still facing considerable challenges which are reflected on a national scale, such as the shortage of HGV drivers, social care staff shortages, and price increases in building supplies. Cabinet have confirmed that there will be a further iteration of the Plan on a Page and this will be received by them in December. To close, members are invited to scrutinise how well the authority has performed in meeting the commitments made in the various iterations of the coronavirus strategy. And as Chair, you mentioned, officers are here to answer questions on their service areas and also on the learning from the past 18 months. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emma. Members, you will see there's a raised hand facility in the chat bar. If you've got your chat bar open, if you could indicate if you'd like to ask some questions, and when you do, could you please direct them to a particular department so that the officers know who who would like to respond. They can decide who would like to respond. So there we are. Councillor Christopher Edwards.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Emma, for your report. My first question is regarding volunteering, and you mentioned that in the report. And obviously, Monmouthshire Council supports volunteers through initiatives such as the Community Leadership Programme, and also, as you mentioned, supported the community response to COVID-19. But back to in relation to volunteering, do you think there are ways outside of this pandemic where the council can maintain the enthusiasm? I mean, I think we all witnessed that in relation to volunteering in the community and the way large numbers of people within Monmouthshire stepped up within their communities during that pandemic. And can we, or how can we maintain that enthusiasm? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Now, who would like to respond to that? Judith Langdon. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm Judith Langdon, Social Justice Innovation Manager. So you're absolutely right, Councillor Edwards, that the response from volunteers during the pandemic was of a scale that we've never seen the like of before, quite frankly, and they were absolutely critical to keeping our citizens safe and well during that period. And that's something as a team we've been working to capitalise on and to sustain very much sort of since the early days of the pandemic. That's taken a number of different iterations, and the way we've structured ourselves to try and support that has gone through a number of different phases. For example, we put in place our Wellbeing Links team, who work with our volunteers to support some of the most vulnerable people, to give them a kind of a sense of scaffold and a sense of us having their back, if you like, when dealing with some of those sometimes slightly trickier cases. But more than that, we know that people's energies, people's enthusiasms are looking to move beyond just COVID support. So essentially that, as you've just described, that sense of energy, that sense of excitement that people have felt about being able to do something within their communities and to feel that kind of warm, fuzzy glow, if you like, is something we want to see continuing. So examples of how we're trying to do that now include the kind of centrepiece is what we're kind of calling our community support networks, although even that's a bit of a working title. But what we're trying to do is across each of our towns and each of our areas, we're now putting in place the structure to allow people to come together with any idea, any challenge that they might have from within their community that they would like to work with others, whether that means working with agencies who might be able to support them, or whether it means garnering support and trying to amass a kind of critical mass of volunteers. But we're also, as well as that kind of centrepiece, doing good old-fashioned community development work. So what we've seen is a real enthusiasm for some sort of spin-off projects. So things like the development of a network of community fridges that's been put in place across the county. And again, officers are working really closely to both support people with those ideas and then also to try and, I think, what I call kind of proliferate those ideas across the county. So where we see something that's working really well, to try and sow that seed in other locations to see if there are other people who'd like to take on a similar kind of idea. And again, that's something we've seen as being received really, really positively. So essentially, it's an absolutely key focus for us going forward to see if we can hang on to and continue to energise that community enthusiasm, because the potential is just enormous.
Thank you, Judith. Is that all right, Christopher? Councillor Edwards, you okay with that?
Thank you.
Yeah, that was a question I was going to ask, because obviously I remember the early days of when you were trying to get the procedures in place to sort of support volunteers. It was quite challenging, because we do have a wealth of volunteers throughout Monmouthshire and always have had. And when the pandemic struck, people were more than anxious to get out there and do what they could, but they had to be mindful of their own safety, and I know that a lot of resources and time went into setting up these structures, and very pleased that it's and yes, we do need them to continue to be supported, because a lot of voluntary groups at the moment just want to come back now. They feel that they want to get going again, so the support you give with all the different training that's available and things like risk assessments, I know that's all been there, I've seen it, so I thank you for all of that. Right, thank you, Judith. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is really not directed to any senior officer in particular, because it applies right the way across the board for something that's been absolutely unprecedented in the last 100 years. And what I really would like to know is how from the senior officers, how your staff have stood up to what's been thrown at them, how basically they have burnt on the hoof, and what their morale is like now, as things ostensibly are coming out of the crisis in a big way, and also how they responded to what I considered was immense leadership from the chief executive. I think it's really important to point that out. I was impressed with the missives that he sent out during the process. Also, what about the firing line? The people in the one-stop shops. I know my workload didn't increase significantly, and maybe that's because the queries were being delivered elsewhere. But I should imagine the one-stop shops really had to increase their performance. Let's put it that way. So I'd just like a general feeling from one or two senior officers, just really the positives that have come out of what's happened. The negatives will flow to the positives. And basically, are we in a better position now than we were at the start? And will we continue on, if that is the case, on the improvements and ideas that have come forward? Sorry, it's a bit rambling, but you know, I've been impressed with what's happened over the last 18 months, and I'd like to know what the officers feel for what's happened and in the future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. That's a very good question, and you weren't rambling. It was very good. Your sound is a little bit faint. It was good earlier. I don't know what, something seems to have happened there. Perhaps could I invite Peter Davis, if he'd like to respond to that? Starters, if anybody else would like to volunteer then.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Councillor Harris for yeah, and I agree with you, Chair. It wasn't rambling. I think it was a very pertinent point, very pertinent question. So yeah, suffice to say, like most public bodies who have obviously been significantly involved in responding to the pandemic over the last 18 months or so. Sorry, apologies, I've just been told my camera's off, but technology is telling me it is in fact on. But
I can see you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So local authorities in particular, beyond obviously health and other services, huge strain put on our services, and you know, from the get-go, I guess the council had to immediately react and respond, and in the way that it did in terms of redeploying staff, etc., establishing test, trace and protect. So I guess we had the benefit, I think, just in terms of the building blocks that underpin Monmouthshire Council. You know, we went into the pandemic with a very healthy culture, with a core set of values, with a workforce that, as always, looks to step over and above and beyond and make that difference. You know, and that came forward in spades when we needed to respond, and as we did. So, you know, people across the business, you know, offering themselves forward to assist and that came, as is outlined in Emma's report, in many guises. Obviously, what comes with that is the cause and effect of quite a significant strain on what we'd probably describe as normal service delivery, and that normal service delivery was not normal, I think, as we understand through the lockdown and with all the restrictions in place. So I guess I'm sure one of my colleagues, I'm sure Francis O'Brien, as Chief Officer for Enterprise, will come in probably just to reflect, I guess, on how that impacted on some of the operational frontline services. But suffice to say, I don't think any part of the workforce and the organisation was left unaffected. I guess in terms of our white collar workforce, in terms of those that obviously sit behind desks as part of their normal day job, they were transitioned into working from home. Again, we were in a very good position organisationally going into the pandemic with that. It was quite an easy transition, and we were supported by the technology that enabled us to do that. So, and I think actually, based on some of the feedback we've had and the work that continues on with Matt Phillips, Chief Officer for Governance and People, the Change in Spaces project and the surveying of staff in that regard has highlighted actually the benefits that those staff have derived from those flexible working arrangements, as much as it's been an incredibly busy period. But probably just finally, just to sort of mention that key point in terms of the ultimate duty of care that we have towards our staff, and their well-being. That's been front and centre at all times. Our HR colleagues have stepped up to the fore right from the outset. We put support and guidance in place for staff to make sure that people weren't falling over. But I think beyond all of that, I think it's just suffice to say it has been an incredibly challenging period. It's also worthwhile highlighting that this isn't over yet. I think all of you will be abreast of the media, the current dynamic, the challenges that the country is facing at the minute, and we are not immune to that. So there are, whether you call it post-Brexit or post-pandemic issues that are in train at the moment, we're having to grapple with those. Probably the most evident of those is the strain that is in train at the minute across the NHS, the ambulance service, and in particular for us, social care. That is, there is some unprecedented demand that we are seeing at the minute and having to deal with a lot of fragility, within that sector at the moment. So that is, we're in for, a tough few months, and it's probably a situation that will probably get worse before it gets better as we move through the winter period. But coming back to Roger's, Councillor Harris's original question, I think we're blessed probably working in Monmouthshire, and obviously with that goodwill that's always there in abundance. We just got to be very careful that we don't push that too far, and recognise the well-being of our colleagues. So, Chair, if that's helpful, just initially in responding to Councillor Harris' questions, that's probably my initial input. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. You mentioned Francis O'Brien. I'd like to respond. Thank you, Francis.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Francis O'Brien, Chief Officer for Enterprise. Just following on from what Peter just said then, I think one of the things for me is that phenomenally impressed by the way in which everyone stepped up during the pandemic. We had, we managed as an authority to continue to provide key critical frontline services throughout the pandemic. A number of neighbouring authorities had to step down elements of their waste service, as an example, but we were able to continue to provide all of those services and throughout. I'm very, very grateful for everyone who did redeploy into different roles. People from our home to school transport service started to drive our refuse vehicles. Some people went in to help our community meal service. All the work that was done in terms of providing support and continuing support, actually, to provide support and food for people who are homeless. You know, the way in which all of our colleagues responded was absolutely phenomenal. And, you know, I'd just like to take the opportunity really to say thank you to everybody, because sometimes the efforts of all of the colleagues got lost in amongst all of the response and the emergency that we were dealing with. And I think, as Peter said, we still haven't ended. You know, the response still continues. The pandemic is still with us. It's still affecting our workforce. In some respects, we're still seeing the impact that's having on our colleagues. And people have been going at this for a very long time. And I think it's been relentless. You know, normally when we're dealing with an emergency situation, it's for a temporary period of time, but we're currently operating and continue to operate within that sort of emergency state where things still aren't back to what we would call normal business and normal operations. But, you know, we've managed to deal with the pandemic, operate all of our services and provide additional services. And I think it's just been an absolutely phenomenal effort. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else want to contribute?
If I could.
Yes, Mr. McLean. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Will McLean, Chief Officer for Children and Young People. Just to build really on what Francis and Peter have already talked about, schools. It was a really difficult period of time for all of the schools in the way that they had to respond and change what's been kind of decades of practice in the way that we work with our children and young people on a day-to-day basis. The immediacy of the lockdown in March 2020, we saw the establishment of childcare hubs, schools open over the weekend, open 8 till 6 beyond normal hours, schools working together, our catering services coming in, providing lunch, free school meals, children. You know, an incredible kind of effort to do that, and really showed the commitment of the sector. As we moved through the pandemic, we obviously saw those transitions into different types of teaching, which were challenging clearly, because, you know, professionals who are used to working with children, with them in front of them, helping them work their way through experiments and work and so on, to suddenly not see the children in that way, but to have to kind of find new and innovative approaches to remote learning, certainly was a challenge. But I think that the whole sector in Monmouthshire responded really positively to that. They were really well led by their head teachers. I think the whole team around the school came together. Without that, we wouldn't have been able to keep our schools open for vulnerable learners and for children of critical workers. Without our caretakers, our teaching assistants, it was a real kind of a team effort, and one which I'm really proud of. We, just to kind of echo the concerns about we're still in it. We still have cases in our schools. Schools are still trying to work supporting some children who are not coming to school because they're either ill with COVID or household members might be isolating and so on. So some of those are real challenges for us at the moment. They're working with quite a fluid and changeable approach in terms of some of the regime from Welsh Government in terms of their expectations. So everyone is still very conscious of where we are. We don't think that we're out of the woods yet, but they're continuing to focus, putting the children at the centre and making sure that their learning is as unaffected as it can be. So a huge effort by everybody.
Thank you very much, Mr. McLean. Does anybody else want to add anything? Okay. Councillor Harris, you're happy with the response? Anything else you want to ask?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, the responses are really what I expected. I just wonder if there are any of the senior officers there that are or have felt pressure that's still ongoing, that maybe we as members haven't heard about yet, and if there are, it's important that we do know about them so that we can help mitigate any problems there. So I think what we have done has been remarkable, and You know, I want that to be public. But if we are struggling, and in certain areas, it would be good for us to know that, so that we can help out, basically, if that's what we need to do. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Are you happy to respond? I see you've turned your camera on, Francis. Thank you, Francis O'Brien.
Thank you, Chair. I think one of the things I would input at this juncture is that the demand that we have seen that has increased has been phenomenal. So over the past few months, when COVID initially kicked in, we saw a significant drop in customer interaction in terms of service requests or complaints and various things, but we have seen a fundamentally significant upturn in that over the past few months. So if I just give an example, the number of freedom of information requests that we've received, we normally get between 6 and 8 a day. We're getting between 15 to 18 a day. We're getting more complaints coming in where they've moved perhaps from a service request into into stage 1 complaints and moving through into stage 2 complaints, which is putting an additional demand and pressure on service areas. We're also getting a considerable amount of incoming traffic about lots of different aspects across the whole of the authority, which is adding to the timescales in which we're able to respond. So I think that is one thing that we're struggling to keep on top of at the moment in terms of that volume of correspondence and incoming traffic. If it's okay, Chair, I'd like to bring in Mark, and if that's okay, because I think Mark can give some really good examples about what's happening in the planning and highways arena as well. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Morning, members. Yeah, just from a personal perspective, in terms of the teams that I'm responsible for, as Francis mentioned, a really significant increase in workload and customer contact, coupled with a couple of things really. So during the pandemic, as you'll appreciate, the workforce across the council's relatively young in many ways, so people with homeschooling responsibilities were particularly impacted, and that really hit the planning team in particular. But they've done an amazing job to carry on. Construction industry hasn't really been affected during the pandemic, apart from a very initial blip. So I think all of those services, the planning, building control, have been incredibly busy still throughout during challenging times. And again, have adjusted to doing things differently, as Councillor Harris will know, with planning committee moving to virtual meetings for a period and virtual site visits, but now we're moving back to normality. So all of that's introduced some additional pressures as well. In that regard, there's a couple of additional posts just being recruited to in the planning teams. They'll be filled shortly and will help with some of that work. In highways, you know, you're aware from other meetings about the resource pressures there and the recruitment we're seeking to undertake. But you know, with the reopening towns work, that was a significant additional piece of work for people in a whole number of different teams, not just in the highways team, in addition to the day job and the usual bits and pieces and the redeployments and the like. So really considerable effort went into making all of that happen as new and additional work, and now we're working through the future plans and future ideas. So again, I mean, I'd echo the comments made earlier and just make you know, a public thank you to all of the team for everything they've done, and for members for working closely with us and patience and understanding in that process. But yeah, there are those ongoing challenges that we're working through, and I think it'll be a little while really until we're fully back on an even keel.
Fine, right. Thank you very much for that information. So now we'll move on to Councillor Anne Webb.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's really good to see all the officers on board this morning. I really appreciate seeing them. Thank you, Chair. You've all, as officers, I'm sure, been talking to other authorities, and are there any changes you would make having talked to these other authorities, and bearing in mind that we're still living, as we've said before, with this virus? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Who would like to respond? Mr. Davis, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and remiss of me as well. I'll probably do what I didn't do last time in my input. Peter Davis, Chief Officer for Resources, Deputy Chief Exec. Thank you. Yeah, I think suffice to say, if we just work our way back, because there's a couple of layers to this. First off, just in terms of the very close engagement and work that we've had with partners and other key stakeholders, this has been evident right from the outset, back from when we went into lockdown initially. I guess the one layer is obviously on the civil contingencies, emergency planning front. I think members will be obviously aware, and through the ongoing and very good communications that the Chief Executive has continued to circulate out right throughout the pandemic. We, as Monmouthshire County Council, have sat on the Gwent-wide SCG, Strategic Coordinating Group, and that's obviously brought together public sector partners across Gwent to react and respond to the pandemic. And obviously that's been ongoing, and that sort of information sharing and some of the lessons learned have been sort of captured and brought through in real time, I guess, in terms of response. I know that doesn't directly respond to Councillor Webb's question, but I'll come back to that now in a moment. But to the point of layers, I guess, there's obviously been continued discussion through WLGA, through with other local authorities, through with Welsh Government, and obviously on an ongoing basis as councils have had to adapt in terms of how they respond. They've responded to the pandemic, and obviously Francis was and Will were both clearly referring to how we've gone and done that in specific parts of the business. I think in terms of lessons learned, there just seems to be a bit of a sort of a interesting dynamic, I guess, playing out really in terms of, I know we've maybe described part of our work around changing spaces. What does the world of work look like as things settle down and we move into, I guess, a sort of a new way of working. Other councils, there does appear to be, I guess, a desire to rush towards a new norm. I think certainly with Monmouthshire, I think we're just evolving and iterating our approach as we move forward, and probably acting in a little bit more, acting more on continual feedback from staff, being a little bit more agile, I think, in terms of our approach. And we will incrementally, I think, see some changes in terms of how we make use, for example, of our office space going forward. But of course, we continue to maintain open lines of communication with other councils, with other partners as well, in terms of securing that feedback. I think the other interesting bit then will be, I guess, the initial question, which was around the volunteering. So I think the interaction with communities, and obviously all the the good social capital that came to the fore at the outset, in the way that question was asked, the relationship, I think, with communities, there are clear opportunities in maintaining those lines of communication. So that's, of course, what Jude and Kath Fallon, Francis O'Brien and all the teams are looking to do, in understanding as to how we can capitalise, I think, on things that we have learnt through the pandemic, things that we can react and respond to in better ways, and we have shown that we've been able to do that in better ways. So we don't just put those things in a drawer somewhere and just move back to how we did things previously. This is all about continuing to innovate and adapt and to change. So I'm sure that other colleagues will come in with some specifics, but I think from my perspective, that's probably my sort of overarching sort of reflection. See Will's come on, so I'll hand seamlessly over to him.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Pete, and thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I think we were, throughout the pandemic, I think that really worked very closely. We had I think for most of the pandemic, there were weekly meetings with the Directors of Education across Wales with Welsh Government. And also we met very regularly as the 5 former Gwent Directors of Education. And that was really helpful because within the parameters that were set by government, it was really good to understand what was possible. It was really good for us to be able to share what we were doing, and there were some things that we did in terms of the mobilisation of the childcare hubs and so on that others were able to reflect on and adapt. And in the same way, we were able to look at what others were doing in terms of some other practical practices. So things like how lunchtimes are managed and so on. So all of those things were really positively shared throughout the process. So I think it was in truth, a collaborative effort. The other point, I think, from our perspective, was that there's such a level of integration in terms of the workforce between our teachers who come to work in our schools, their children attending school in other local authorities. There had to be a good level of integration across the 5 to make sure that everybody could continue to have their staff accessing work and so on. So we had to be flexible and look to some of those common approaches where necessary. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. McLean. Right. Oh, Frances O'Brien, yeah, if you'd like to respond.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to suggest that we ask Carl to just come in a moment, if that's okay, to just set out how we worked from an operational services perspective, really, around things like waste, highways and suture, in terms of how not only we worked in a all Wales context, but how we adapted as a region, and some of the work that the team led on at a regional level around some of the systems that we put in place very, very quickly around our household waste recycling centres and some of those things that were stepped up very quickly. And then once Carl's given us some insight into that, I just wondered if we could bring in Mark Hand then around some of the things that from a service perspective have worked really well from a whole organisation around things like the digital coach and the people's Q&A. So if that's okay, Chair, it would be great if Carl then Mark could come in. Thank you.
Yes, please do. Yeah. Mr. Twig, Carl.
Thank you, Councillor. So when the pandemic hit and we went into the first lockdown, the only service that we didn't roll out immediately was the garden waste service, but we got that up and running within the first 6 weeks. The HWRCs were closed as part of an all Wales decision to close those sites to make it safe for our residents. We worked closely with Welsh Government and the 22 other local authorities to get those sites reopened as quickly as we could, and we brought a booking system in haste. It was another system that was manipulated to become the booking system, so it was a little clunky at first and people did struggle, but we've made vast improvements on that booking system now, and we've seen over 160,000 visits in the first year to the site since we brought in the booking system. So I think, you know, residents are taking that on board and moving forward with it. All of the teams pulled together. We had, as Francis said earlier, we had grounds and highways, suture teams all delivering waste services, because at that initial stage that was the most important services that we were delivering for our public at that time. So I think that was greatly appreciated by the public, and you know, lots of times that I went out with the crews, we were seeing stickers on bins saying thank you bin men, we love you very much. So a very positive response from our residents as well. You know, also, as Francis said, as we're coming, I'm not saying we're out of the pandemic, but as we're coming out of it now more and returning to normal, the pressure of people for the services that they want now is increasing hugely. So we are seeing a much greater demand for services. There's considerably more people staying at home, staycationing, which creates more rubbish, which creates more recycling, which puts more pressure on the teams out there as well. People are staying closer to home, so they're experiencing more of the issues in their local environment, whether that's the grass growing or potholes or whatever it is, streetlights not working all the time. People are much more focused on it now because they're spending a lot more time in their own homes and their own communities. So we are seeing a huge amount more pressure being put on our services. We're getting there. We're getting back up to speed ourselves, and hopefully the public will stick with us and accept that it's been a torrid time for everyone over the last 18 months, and hopefully we'll return to some normality, everybody, quite soon. I hope that covers the question, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Toohey. We'll move on to Mr. Hands.
Thanks, Chair. I can't really comment on what's happened elsewhere, but in terms of things that have been done in Monmouthshire and have really worked well in my opinion, and with feedback from the teams. So I'm not sure how aware members are, but during the height of the pandemic, on a weekly basis, there was a staff digital coach that the comms team hosted, and you know, at every meeting, either Paul Matthews or one of the senior leadership team were there giving updates, you know, both on COVID data, but also service delivery and just generally getting everyone together really and helping morale stay high and offering that support. So that was a really positive step that I think everybody in the service areas welcomed. Other bits that worked well, so clearly we're an agile working organisation already, so we're able to adapt really quickly and easily to that, and working from home, so that helped. Wasn't without its minor hiccups, but that really helped us get going, and that culture of colleagues to work in that different way and be flexible really aided us as well. Teams, although we probably joke about being slightly sick of it now, the speed with which that was rolled out and the effectiveness of us being able to keep working and hold team meetings on a kind of an informal HR support fashion, as well as business, has been great, and also some lessons learned. So as an example, I know Kath will talk in a minute about a meeting we hold with other stakeholders, but with customers in planning, holding virtual pre-application meetings has actually been a huge benefit to a lot of people. So thinking on a wider context, things like our carbon footprint, when we had pre-application meetings before, we'd literally have consultants and agents travelling from all around the UK coming to us for a physical meeting, quite often feeling sort of obliged on behalf of their clients to physically be there and to interact fully. Those meetings are working so well now on a virtual basis, and it's really benefiting everybody. You know, a few hours not driving around the country is helpful to everybody. So that kind of service change will carry on. And then I guess the other adjustments made, so colleagues in the property team, just making it possible for us to book desks and have a safe working environment in the office on the rare occasion we did need to come in, or for people who, especially those living alone, it could be quite a lonely experience during lockdown, so it was really valuable for them to come in and see other people. So again, the speed and ease with which that was rolled out when it was possible for people to come in and safely return to the office if they needed to from time to time, and see some other faces and engage with people face to face when it was safe to do so. So I think all of those things worked really well. Chair, can I bring Kath Fallon in? She had a couple of points she wanted to mention, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Kath Fallon, Head of Enterprise and Community Animation. Good morning, all. Really, I just wanted to build on the collaborative approach, really, that we'd undertaken, if that's okay, really from two aspects. One being our interaction with our communities during a very difficult time for everyone. We were able to, as been mentioned earlier, really, to unleash our social capital, but also on the understanding that this was very much us working together. And very much sort of ensuring that you know, we were working with our friends and our neighbours, really, to encourage people to look after each other, but also for us to be able to direct our services in the right way. And very much so working across directorate, and I think that's really important for us to raise, and something we've built on as we've gone forward, really, in terms of the links we've now developed with our health and social care colleagues. So, for example, as sort of early days, we were having sort of calls and conversation with people who really needed quite an in-depth level of support, and we were able to triage those inquiries with our health and social care colleagues to ensure we were getting the right service to the right person and quickly. And that's really something that we've moved forward with, and now have sort of mental health and social workers working as part of our team to ensure that we're taking that interventionist, preventionist approach as we move forward. forward. But importantly, I also wanted to mention the business support really and the grants that were delivered, sort of 6,500 payments and £40 million. It's an awful lot of money, particularly from where we came from a starting standpoint really, into we did not have a business grants delivery team. So we had to step one up very quickly with the help of our finance and audit colleagues who were absolutely brilliant, but also right across to colleagues in estates and procurement who were actually working with us on business advice issues. And it was really great to see everybody coming forward and helping us with that. But importantly, also with our local businesses. We actually sort of a business resilience forum that was actually on the back of the flooding, and literally the first meeting was not about flooding, was straight into COVID. And through that, I don't think we'd have got as many payments out to as many people without our local business support. And they've been absolutely great in terms of really sort of making people aware of the options to apply for grants. And I think without them, we wouldn't have kept as many local businesses afloat during this really difficult time. And alongside that, as we were able to reopen the campaign with our community communications and engagement colleagues, sort of shop local campaigns, but importantly with our tourism colleagues as well, sort of as people were starting to consider leaving and going into out into the wider world, it's sort of visit Monmouthshire but visit safely, and it was very much key in terms of keeping our messaging, you know, aligned as we move forward. So I just wanted to raise those points. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, very helpful. Councillor Webb, are you happy with the responses? Anything you want to add?
More than happy, more than happy. Thank you, Chair, for the response. It's just amazing. It just makes you realise what we've been through and what the officers have done. Kath says we've unleashed so much more than social capital, and you all have. You really have gone far more than we were ever expected, and thank you all so much. Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to speak again. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Webb. Eve Parkinson, you've got your hand up next.
Thank you, Chair. It was to respond to what Anne was saying. I'm not quite sure how you come in. I think it would be it's important to say that we've also managed to make some significant strides in our partnership with our independent sector. We've held weekly meetings with our domiciliary care providers and the residential and nursing homes across Monmouthshire, and I think that's been hugely valued. And helping and supporting them with things like PPE, but also the guidance, what to do when they're in incidents, staffing shortages. They've been really well attended, and I think that's something that will carry on for the foreseeable future. I think it's also highlighted how much more we need a consolidated partnership with our health colleagues, and that has started of late, where I think there's an appreciation that we can't look at these systems in isolation. So we can't look at social care and we can't look at the health board as two different entities. They have to work closely together. And just generally, I think that, you know, everyone knows, and Peter alluded to the pressures that we have at the moment. I think our staff worked phenomenally well through the sort of main of the pandemic, but I don't think we really appreciated what the impact of lockdown would have on residents and the unprecedented challenges that we're facing at the moment. I think morale is fair at the moment, but there is some anxieties as we go into the winter months, which are usually our challenging months, but will probably be more so going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Guppy.
Thank you, Chair. I've got quite a few comments on this report, but first I want to say thank you very much for Paul Matthews for leading us in this pandemic. It's still happening, it's not gone away. Lots of officers have said, you know, we're not out of the woods yet and we'll never be out of the woods. The communication and challenges that these officers have had to deal with and are still dealing with is relentless, as some of the officers have said, and I just thank you. I'm really disappointed that none of our cabinet members are here today, not even the leader, just to listen to what officers have to say and what they're actually dealing with on you know, day-to-day issues. Thank Thank you very much for the report. I think it's a first report of many. I think we need a follow-up report in view of what each services are doing and what each challenges that services or the departments are dealing with at present. There's lots of things that have changed and need to change, and I think that needs to be at the forefront of our work within our council. Things have changed for the better. For example, no more May, absolutely fabulous. So let's take that forward. Let's look at our areas that we're responsible for. Let's make them better areas and more environmental friendly and more pretty as well. Let's get some more wildflowers in these areas. There are some things in the report. I'm not quite sure if celebrate in a pandemic is the right word to use, but what are we doing about our staff? We've praised our staff. I've used lots of praise from officers here today, but I want to know what actually have we done to praise our staff, because it is relentless. It's not gone away. It's not going away. How they're keeping up their motivation to continue when actually they're exhausted. And what are we doing for our staff on the ground level? I want to know what's happening. We've got things in the report that says about shielding. Have all our staff that have been shielding, have they come back in? There's lots of movements within staff in different departments, and lots of people may have retired, they may have stayed within other departments, they have migrated into other areas and gained promotion, which is absolutely excellent. But how are we filling those vacancies, really? I just think, as the officers have said, it's not gone away, and it's not happening. And I think I think as members, we all really need to know about that. So I want to know what our way forward is really, and what changes have we learned so far in which that we're going to take forward. For example, lots of people have done walking and cycling. So are we going to take forward our cycling routes? Lots of people now are working from home. There are, and I know that there's meetings going on regarding the Severn Tunnel Junction, but actually we're looking to expand car parks. But the car parks are not full anymore. So I think, we need to rejig what our priorities were. And I think each department needs to do that. It's what's happened within Monmouthshire. It appears to have been a seamless transition from what was a crisis that is still happening, and it's been absolutely brilliant. There are a few things within education. You hear on telly about all these children that have fallen behind. Well, I'm sorry, I just think that's political jargon. Have they really fallen behind? Because I know that the teaching staff have done absolutely fabulous, and I don't think we have celebrated it enough. I don't think we have promoted what we have done in this county that is different from everybody else. It's not compare and contrast. It's actually, bigging us up, really. How we dealt with vulnerability, social services, absolutely fantastic. I've got personal experience or professional experience of working with them, how they have managed to deal with what they've had to deal with when home visited, and have been absolutely horrendous. I'm not quite sure whether the use of PPE could have been improved for local authority. Very difficult when you've got health authority and social care staff wearing different PPE to the local authority. That's one area I think you need to look at. And specifically, I want to know, in view of absolutely tremendous efforts on local businesses and taking our homeless, but what are we doing now as things are starting to become, I'm not quite sure, normal? We'll never go back to normal, ever. It'll be different. What are we doing about all the accommodation that was used? How are we going to support our social care and children's services in view of there are such issues that's emerged because of the pandemic, in view of neglect, domestic abuse, and how are we going to address these issues in view of already an overworked service? And I just thank officers again for their tremendous motivation and enthusiasm, and I don't know how they're going to keep it up because it is relentless, and I just hope that each department that have sent a letter to every key worker, every worker within their department, and thank them very much for their staff for their efforts and ongoing efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Guppy. Now, there are several questions there, so who would like to start? There may be some that you can't answer immediately. You might have to provide further information. Quite happy with that, but if there's anything that you want to sort of respond to immediately, that would be helpful. I see we have Mr. McLean on and Eve Parkinson. You both turned on your camera, so I'm assuming you'd both like to respond. So
I'll let you go first and then I'll come in.
Thank you.
Thank you, Will. Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up a couple of points from Councillor Guppy. First one with regards to what we've tried to do to keep staff morale up and engaged. We've done lots of things from a local perspective, you know, in each of the areas and the teams, from things like competitions, pimp up your visor, having afternoon teas. It's something that that's sort of on our agendas all the time. We've done lots of things like walking meetings followed by coffee and cake when we've been allowed to. We've also done some things across the whole of the borough. So we've sent, actually in the post, the old-fashioned way, everybody was sent a personalised thank you card. So everyone in the organisation received a card in the post. We have done, you know, some stuff around emails and things like that, but also aware that, you know, not all of our frontline staff use emails readily. Hence we used the Royal Mail. We also had our own sort of digital coach that was specific for our staff, so that we were able to factor that in around times that were suitable for them. So obviously a lot of our frontline staff are working, you know, shift patterns, so we coordinated those so that we could get as many people on. So we did morning sessions, we did afternoon sessions, we did evening sessions, so that everybody had the opportunity to join and talk about what was challenging and what was difficult. I think with regards to your comments about vacancies, it is very challenging for us at the moment. I think we are recruiting literally on a 24/7 basis. We've got rolling adverts out all the time, and it varies the responses that we get. I think we're currently working on around a deficit of 1,200 care hours per week, which obviously brings a lot of anxieties in some of the teams. And of course the independent sector are faced with similar problems, so we have to factor that in as well. And I think PPE, I think we've done an amazing job with PPE. I think in the very early days of the pandemic there was some anxieties as the rules changed, but we very quickly mobilised our resources. We've had a phenomenal amount of help with regards to storing, transporting, getting the PPE out into the various hubs. If a home has gone into incident, we've been able to respond very quickly. And we've had I don't think we've had any real significant issues with that of late, and people are very confident that they can access what they can access. And just final comment is thank you for your comments about social services. It has been a tough ride and not everybody is always very positive, but I'm very grateful for those comments.
Thank you. Mr. McLean, would you like to come in next?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think we all saw very quickly that that staff really did need some support, and that actually, you know, it was an incredibly trying time for everybody, and the expectations of people were very high, and the normal time that we would have to plan was simply not there. And you know, I think I've said at other times and in other places, you know, if someone had said, you know, with regards to remote learning, that within, you know, and literally a number of weeks, you'd be able to work with your children remotely, you know, have them set up on a whole range of different IT platforms so they can access learning and engage with their teachers in a safe and meaningful way. You know, you'd have said, well, I'll probably need 2 years to plan and introduce that. And yet it was turned around so quickly. So I think there was inevitably that pressure on members of staff. One of the things we did in education was, because they were such unprecedented times, we brought back a recently retired head teacher of very long standing and great expertise and experience. And he was able to act as a touchstone for our school leaders, so that when there were kind of matters of concern or things which they just wanted to explore with someone to talk about, they were able to reach out and contact him, and he was able to provide that advice and guidance to them, not reaching out to the local authority or to HR or so on, although all of those avenues were still there. But there was somebody there as a professional who, in completely unprecedented times, was able just to offer them that professional perspective on what they should be doing. We worked really closely with all of our colleagues in the trade union movements. We held weekly meetings with them so that we could be really clear about what our expectations were about their concerns, and there were many specific concerns all the way through this process, and we worked with them really closely, and I think that stood us in great stead to be able to talk to both the teaching, the leadership and the support unions in one place. Meant that we all had a very common understanding of what expectations were of staff through it, but also what staff needed to feel confident to come to school. So I think that was a really, really important dialogue throughout the whole period of the pandemic. The other part, you know, we obviously did have some people who were extremely clinically vulnerable. We had to work with our schools to support them, to make sure that they didn't put themselves at undue risk. And I think that really good work between our school leaders and our HR colleagues allowed that to happen very effectively. So I think there was a lot of work done there to celebrate the work that the schools did, but also to support them to make sure that they were able to actually achieve what they wanted to achieve. And going back to Pete's very, very first comments this morning, we talked about the values that we saw our employees and our teams display, and I think that one of public service was absolutely evident throughout from everybody who they, you know, everybody in their schools and how they worked. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. McLean. Right. Oh, Mr. Bakewell, would you like to respond?
Thank you, Chair. I'm Ian Bakewell. I'm the Housing and Communities Manager for the Council, and my one of my responsibilities is homelessness. And to pick up on Councillor Guppy's query about accommodation, leaving no stone unturned at the moment in terms of looking for accommodation opportunities. Councillor Guppy is obviously aware that we have a really big issue at the moment in terms of homelessness and our shortage of accommodation. And as we sit here at the moment, we've got around 160 households waiting for permanent accommodation, and a good proportion of those are in B&B. So some of the key steps that we're taking to try and address that. The first one is actually preventing homelessness, actually, rather than the provision of accommodation. Obviously, if we can get our homeless prevention right, if we can improve on it, it stops people coming through and avoids the need for for provision. So we're having more conversations again. We'll be revisiting processes to look at how we can strengthen what we do for homeless prevention. And as a council, we've had support to invest in staffing in that, right? So as we sit here at the moment, we've now got more people working on homeless prevention than we did pre-pandemic. In terms of actual accommodation provision, we can group it in probably a number of categories. The first one is working with our housing association partners in respect to the existing social housing stock in Monmouthshire. The housing associations have been really supportive with us. There are more people going into more homeless households going into social housing previously, and we're also looking at how we can use social housing differently. We've asked the housing associations to do more shared housing. We've asked them to target properties that can be released through transfers. So they're targeting overcrowded one-bedroom properties at the moment. And we've also asked them to consider how we use properties. So can properties be redesignated for a homeless purpose? That's all great, but again, there is an implication of that. More homeless people that we accommodate, it does have an impact on other groups. So that is obviously something that we need to be mindful of as we work with the housing associations on that. Other things that we're doing with the housing associations, there's a long-standing practice of them buying as accommodation. That will continue. We've had some great properties bought for us, and we're also using new properties coming through that were originally intended for general use, but we're now using for homelessness. And a good example of this is we've got a scheme in Chepstow, which Mellon Homes built us. We've got 8 one-bedroom flats in Garden City. Absolutely fantastic quality, really good quality, and a real asset to the service. And they're homes. It's not accommodation. They're homes. It's great. We're also, again, long-standing practice of using the private rented sector for accommodation, and you'll probably be aware we've got a brand that we use to try and engage with private landlords. That's the Monmouthshire Letting Service. That's something that we want to invest in and further develop. Can we further professionalise it, make it a stronger brand, and entice more private landlords into the sector? And we've, again, council supported us very well and enabled us to employ a dedicated Monmouthshire Lettings officer. And also partly linked with the private sector, we're making a real concerted point of looking at town centres. So are there opportunities above shop premises? So we're close to completing a survey of 300 retail businesses in that regard to get a feel of what is available. And all of the housing associations have said they will look for town centre opportunities. I will say what it is highlighting is the challenges involved with many of these properties in town centres. They don't lend themselves to easy change because of fire regulations, because of access arrangements, construction. etc., and space standards. But they're barriers and hurdles that we're looking to overcome. And we've actually established an empty homes action plan that we'll be actually presenting to Select fairly shortly. And then probably the other area, and again this is a new area for us. There are conversations have started about the council actually purchasing properties, and again you'll be aware that conversations have also started about the council becoming a developer and building our own homes, and we've certainly been having conversations about whether there is scope for that initiative to link in with the homeless agenda. So again, both not easy areas to take forward, but they are the ones that we are giving serious consideration, and a lot of officer time is going into to all of these at the moment. And lastly, we're talking to other agencies and voluntary agencies. So there was a conversation earlier in the week with the church organisation who have offered to buy us a property or buy a property that we can access, and we've also forged a link with a voluntary agency in Chepstow that's keen to acquire accommodation. So again, we hope that will bring some fruit. All of these are relatively small things, but we hope add them all together, and it will start to make inroads into the additional accommodation that we need.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Can I just at this stage point out that you did mention cabinet members not being invited. Councillor Guppy, that's actually not being present. They weren't actually invited because this is more an opportunity for officers to talk about things that have happened throughout the pandemic. It's not a discussion about the sort of strategic direction. It's about lessons learned and experiences, an opportunity for officers to discuss what's happened, what challenges they faced, how they've overcome them, and what lessons they've learned from it. And we're very grateful to the officers for their input this morning. And I hope it's as beneficial to officers as it is to us to have you all here together, because obviously it must be quite interesting now to sort of all of you to review everything together. I'm hopeful of that anyway. I see we have Kath Fallon on screen. You want to respond? Thank you.
And yes, I totally agree with you. Actually, it is great to have an opportunity to thank all our teams, because they've been absolutely amazing. And I just really wanted to sort of give some examples from an enterprise perspective, some of the things that we were doing. And Francis very kindly did a video for us sort of at Christmas that we've sent out to everybody, which was absolutely great and really appreciated. We followed that up with Christmas cards. Obviously we have a lot of staff who don't have access to emails, so like as Eve mentioned earlier, it's really important that we got that message out. So we followed that up with individual emails as well. And actually since then we've been doing a lot of sort of touch points, away days where we can, a lot of sort of collective work, team walks. You know, we've even sort of been down sat by the river, you know, over the summer and things like that, just really to get people walking and talking. I think the other thing we've learned really is the difference in working from home and on Teams, because if you're in County Hall and you go past someone, you sense that something's not quite right, you can sort of pull them to one side and have a quiet chat. It's not that easy on Teams, so we've really learned that it's important to, are you okay, but yeah, actually are you okay, and to actually follow that through and to ensure that we really are looking after people, and we really hope that we're continuing to do that, and certainly we'll be doing that going forward. So I'd also like to pass on to Carl now, if that's okay. Carl Twig, and can give you a perspective from the resources side of things, neighbourhood services. Thanks, Carl.
Thank you very much. Welcome, Carl.
And my apologies, it's Carl Clewick, Head of Neighbourhood Services. I should have said that the first time. So thanks very much for bringing me in. Yeah, as Kat said, we sent cards out to everybody. I personally wrote the cards, their addresses and their names to my 300 staff. So yeah, it took a fair amount of my time on that run up to Christmas last year. We've gone out and worked with staff on the front line to see the issues that they're having. Have we done enough? Are we thanking them enough? I don't think we are, but you know, we try our best. I have 300 staff. It's very difficult to personally thank every one of them every week for the job that they do, as much as I'd like to. I hope my team around me are making sure that all of their teams know how grateful we are. I send out emails. I try and do my very best. I think we are struggling now. Staff are beginning to feel 18 months worth of pressure starting to build up on them now, and we have a long way to go to come out of this. So, you know, we're seeing some increases in missed collections, for instance, and you know, it would be great if councillors across the board supported us. We manage 70,000 collections a week, and we have a missed collection rate of less than 0.1%. So, you know, in perspective, we're doing 99.9% of the work and delivering it really well. So, you know, a slightly different narrative would be helpful for staff because they are feeling the burden of all this additional work coming their way. So I think, you know, across the board, as managers, as members, we can change that narrative and celebrate the work we are doing rather than feel that we are not delivering all the services that we perhaps were pre-pandemic at that service level. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Right, yes, I must be honest, I've had the most wonderful response from every department, but when somebody's refuse is uncollected, people do get a little bit cross. But I do point out that the officers are doing their best, and I've always had immediate responses. So thank you, Councillor Guppy. I hope that's answered all your queries. If not, perhaps we could ask you to take up something individually with departments, because there were quite a lot of questions there, weren't there? Is there anything particularly you wanted to come back on, or can we move on?
Yeah, it's just thanks for the officers, and thank you very much for the officers who have actually gone above and beyond to thank all their staff. I think there are some departments that maybe need to do that, and just to say, in view of the information regarding to homelessness, really progressive. I know it's a challenge, always has been a challenge, and thanks Ian for your efforts, and I know you'll drive this forward. Well, we don't want to see pregnant women, and we do not want to see children in bed and breakfast or hotels, and I know you're up against something that you can't change overnight, but let's do every effort to get these families and vulnerable people out of the bed and breakfasts. And in respect of, it would have been quite nice for cabinet members to come to this meeting and listen to what the officers have to say. And what I didn't ask earlier was about how we need to harness people staying locally in view of tourism, but I think somebody touched on that, and I think we need to promote ourselves just a tad more about it, because this is a wonderful county to live in and reside. But also as well, in view of the local LDP, we want to keep our people in Monmouthshire, and we want our youngsters who have worked and become professionals, we want them to live here, and we want to make it them able to live here. It's so difficult for them to get on a housing ladder. I think we need to move forward in being able to make that happen. We've got affordable homes, we have not enough low-cost homes, and we need to change that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Guppy. We'll move on now to Councillor Treharne.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank Emma for the report. It's quite a comprehensive report. It addresses a lot of the issues and a lot of the work that has been going on. As Kath mentioned earlier, and I think, to be fair, with the pandemic, the issue of the terrible flooding that we endured last winter has somewhat been pushed to the background. So my question is, when the emergency teams were set up and the work was going on and certain officers were dispersed to, or members of staff were dispersed to emergency responses, it was literally overnight. They were allowed, everybody was allowed out and continue their work and day jobs and this, that and the other. And virtually overnight we were told to stay at home. So how did the council transition from being an active emergency responder to suddenly having to think we need to do this safely, and how smooth was that transition, and were there any issues and problems with that? I don't know who that would be directed to directly, but Mark, excellent. Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hans.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Trahan. It's a really good question, actually, because we spend so much time focusing on the pandemic over the last 18 months. We do tend to forget that we entered the pandemic immediately from, and having not recovered from, another crisis, which was 18 months or so of flooding incidents, the last one being in March 2020. So I noted recently I caused to watch the planning committee footage from the start of March and thought the chair was about to mention people affected by the pandemic, but of course that wasn't quite upon us then. It was actually talking about people impacted by the flooding, and reminded me how rapidly we went from one to the next. In terms of the officers directly involved, the flooding team weren't redeployed. They were continuing to work, but we're still working through a significant number of Section 19 or local flood reports to conclude our investigations on what caused the flooding, what steps are needed by different agencies. So we were able to carry on with that work. That just in itself has taken a long time. We're able to use the technology to have those community meetings on the worst affected communities in a virtual manner normally. At the very initial stages, we had the added complexity. So yeah, in March 2020, when we did have the latest of the floods, we had the added complexity of trying to rehouse people and support them and deliver sandbags and the like during the pandemic. So that just needed a sensible approach in terms of working practices and social distancing where we could. But colleagues throughout the council just cracked on and did it. We did have the slight advantage in some ways at that time that we had emergency accommodation in the B&Bs and hotels because they were otherwise closed, albeit it was a bit trickier getting some of them to reopen to help us. But at least they weren't full of tourists or visitors, so we did have some capacity. So I think in itself, the COVID pandemic didn't sort of directly or significantly affect that work. It made it harder, and we had to do a few things slightly differently. But yeah, I mean, as you suggest, we're so focused now on the pandemic, we'd almost forgotten that we entered it from that other period of really challenging circumstances. So yeah, it's amazing that everyone's managed to keep going as they have. So I guess I sort of picked up partly in a question around the work, just to reassure members that's ongoing. So we've got a few main bits of work going on this year. We have to update the local flood risk management plan for Monmouthshire. We're completing and publishing now the Section 19 flood reports, or the local flood reports where the Section 19 trigger wasn't met. And there's a couple of meetings we're arranging for sort of review and regroup meetings. So Mega and Caldecott in particular, where they were new and fairly significant flood events, regrouping and going through the actions from several months ago to pick up on those. I guess the other thing that you'll probably be aware of, Councillor Trahan, with your planning committee hat on, is the new national flood planning policy that's been issued. So we're working through the implications of that. and really building all of that work into the future now. So thinking of the climate emergency and the climate action plan strategy and the replacement local development plan, and how all of that ties together in terms of resilience and avoiding that risk in the future, in accordance with the new strengthened policies. So yeah, as you allude to, loads going on. I don't think COVID necessarily hugely impacted on that work, other than the challenges affecting everyone. So, you know, colleagues homeschooling and doing the day job couldn't have the usual meetings and the like. So yeah, those challenges there. It might well be, you'll probably be aware, we've got a couple of workshops booked in around different highways or planning topics. One of our considerations is doing something on a kind of a combined flooding team and planning team around the new flooding policy and the recent floods, and holding a workshop with members to talk through that, either as a workshop or via one of these select committees. So that might be a topic of interest to members as we move forwards. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hans. A lot of information there. Are you happy with that, Councillor Trehan?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mark, for that. I would be very interested in that work group or seminar or whatever workshop. That'd be great. I would just like to convey my thanks to all officers for the last 18, 20 months, and also our staff who got feet on the ground, our frontline staff who unfleetingly went out to continue their day jobs without any thought really. When we were in lockdown, when we were told to stay at home, they didn't hesitate and to continue carrying out their duties. And without those and the support of the officers as well, it would have been impossible to do. And myself and my residents are eternally grateful, and thank you very much, and long may it continue. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Trehan. Right, the last councillor who's indicated they wish to speak is Councillor Easton. Following that, I'll invite any officer who hasn't had the opportunity to give their views. If they want to speak, just pop it into the chat bar for me. But otherwise, Councillor Easton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for all the comments made. I got two questions, and one is based on 3.8 in the report regarding the challenges going on, which are going to continue to go on for quite a while. The one in particular which I want to hone in on is the shortage of HGV drivers within Monmouthshire. How many HGV posts do we actually have in Monmouthshire, and what is the shortfall on those posts? And has any research been done as to why we can't get them or retain them? And what is the non-attraction to working for us? And the other thing is the 0.1% of the public are the important parts of the public. They're the ones that see the problems, and they're the ones we do resolve. And I've had my share of the 0.1% in my ward, and I believe that I've dealt with them with the teams in the appropriate manner. The second question is to Ian. We all know there's a massive shortfall in houses and properties for housed people. I've had many conversations with him over this. Has the Afghan crisis put extra pressure on Ian's department in terms of housing Afghan refugees, and how many Afghan refugees have we actually managed to house? Thank you for my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Who would like to respond to that? First one, perhaps for HGV drivers. Thank you. And then Mr. Bakewell.
Hi, Councillor, thank you. We currently have a small shortage in HGV drivers across the frontline services. We're out for recruitment now for 6 drivers for waste services. The applications close on Friday, and my understanding is that we've got 8 applications so far. So hopefully all good applications, and we will be back up to where we need to be. The reasons are many for the HGV shortages. COVID, Brexit, amongst other things, are causing issues across the supply chain. It's difficult for public sector to match the pay that others can give. Widely across the news, we're seeing Tesco's and the like offering £45,000–50,000 for HGV drivers willing to work unsavoury hours, but nonetheless it's still a lot of money compared to what the local authorities can pay. So we are struggling with several fronts and issues. It's not just HGV drivers, although that is what is mainly in the news. Across the board we are seeing difficulties, whether it's loaders, whether it's carers, whether it's cleaners, whether it's caterers. We are finding difficulties to employ into all roles. So it's not just HGV drivers, but you know, as the councillors know, and members across the board know, when that missed bin happens, that is what affects people, and it really makes them start shouting. So, you know, we are very cognizant of the fact that we have to get enough drivers in on ways to make sure that we can deliver these services. So that's what we're trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Bakewell. Thank you, Carl.
Yeah, as Councillor Easton's obviously aware, as an authority, we've made a commitment to supporting, accommodating Afghans, and to answer Councillor Easton's question, I don't think it really has conflicted with homeless or causing an extra pressure. At the last state of play, from my perspective, was that that there were 3 properties that had been put forward from the housing associations, and to my knowledge, none of those have actually been taken. Nobody's come over as yet. Those properties are being assessed by the team that we work with in Newport, and prepared for the families to come over. And those properties probably would have gone to non-homeless applicants, I would suggest, or there's nothing definitive about that. So I'm looking at this as a homeless opportunity. There are potentially Matt Gatehouse has put out a request, an appeal to through the leader to ask for private landlords and other property owners to come forward to help Afghans, and I know the response there was actually very good, and that provides us as another group of people with whom we can actually engage with about the use of the properties, and about whether there is scope to work with them in terms of homelessness. So I hope that, I can't really give you a definitive answer, but I think in the grand scheme of things, the two are running in parallel, and at this stage certainly not causing any undue problems.
Okay, thank you, Ian. I don't expect an answer to this next one. I'm looking forward to the development of a council's building programme. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Before we move on, have we got any officers who want to make any further contribution before I sum up? No, all quiet, as far as I can see. Right. Well, how can we sum that up? There was an awful lot of information in Emma Davis's report, which is very much appreciated. That just sort of gave us the opportunity to look further into the different areas. I hope officers have enjoyed it as much as we have. I say enjoyed the opportunity of reviewing what's happened. Sometimes it's good to stand back and look into your own sort of place of work and what you've been doing. This is where I used to find going on courses helpful, because you could stand back and look at your your role and what you're doing from a different perspective. And I just felt this today, that hopefully officers would appreciate actually talking to each other and looking at what they've done and listening to what other departments have done. I know you meet together regularly and you work with other authorities, which is, you collaborate, which is excellent, and you told us all about that. There have been so many examples today. It would be hard to sort of sum up by going through examples. We've heard from all the various departments. We haven't touched too much on finances, but we've got the budget monitoring as the next item on the agenda. So I would just like to say that we have considered the council's response to the pandemic and the lessons it's learned. We recognise the pandemic has posed significant, and I don't say that lightly, significant challenges to all of the council's service delivery. We carried on. Our coronavirus strategy, which was adopted by the Cabinet, ensured activities were focused and coordinated in the midst of the pandemic. But the opportunity, I say again, to consider such a detailed analysis today and have the relevant officers here to talk to us and answer our questions has been very worthwhile. Today, that the officers have held officers to account, however, we offer them our ongoing support, and that has come over loud and clear. Our support is with you post-pandemic, and thanks for everything you've done. So in implementing the lessons learned, which will shape our future service delivery, I'd like to thank you all again for your time in attending today. And all the efforts of ensuring quality service are delivered to our residents in unprecedented time. And Emma, thank you for the report and everything you put into it, to all our officers, and I can see some hands going up. Councillor Harris, did you want us to add something to that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could we recommend that the Cabinet collectively sits down and looks at the recording of what we've done today? As you say, summing up is almost impossible, but I think it's most important that Cabinet realise the in-depth that we've looked at what's been happening today, how much on the whole we appreciate what is being done, and if they could spend the time watching what we've deliberated today, I think it would be good for them. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. And yes, we've been kept informed as members, and I know the staff. It's all been said, but I've just got to add thanks to the whole of the team, from our chief executive to all the officers and staff and workforce. You've worked extremely hard, but we've all been with you. We've all been kept informed, and that is the most important thing you can do in anything in life, is to communicate with each other. So I hope that continues, and I hope that this has been as helpful to you this morning as it has been to us. And I thank you all once again. I think we'll have a 2-minute break before we move on. Thank you. Right. I hope that gave you an opportunity just to think about the next item on our agenda. Welcome to our officers from the finance team, and we are now going to look at the budget monitoring for month 2, and we have with us Jonathan Davis. Hello, Jonathan.
Good morning, Chair.
Good morning. It still is morning. We're all right.
Just about. Good morning, Chair and members. Jonathan Davis, Acting Assistant Head of Finance here at Monmouthshire. Yeah, quite the report to follow, but I think probably quite a few linkages to what we've heard about this morning already. I think first off, Chair, just a couple of apologies from myself, really. This is a month 2 forecast revenue and capital outturn report. So it reflects forecasts that were drawn up as at the end of May 2021. So quite a bit of time has passed since then. And this is a report that was seen by Cabinet in late July. So I think obviously the summer period the staff resourcing in finance has impacted the timing of bringing this report in front of this committee, which is unfortunate, but obviously has a couple of benefits in so much that we have some up-to-date information on a few of the areas, especially in terms of the Welsh Government Hardship Fund, so which we'll come on to. And secondly, just to note that there's been a bit of a mix-up in terms of the appendix, which has been used in the papers. The appendix that starts on page 33 of the pack, which is used to show specific strong communities services. The incorrect version has been included in the pack, which shows the overall local authority position. But my colleague Dave Loader is going to take the committee through the specific services shortly, and hopefully draw attention to the most relevant parts for this committee. But just on an overall local authority perspective to start, and I guess the most clear example of what we were forecasting at month 2 is on page 23, I think, of the pack. And that breaks down the overall forecast deficit that we were looking at month 2 on the revenue account, which totaled £9.02 million. But I think it's important that we split this out, and which we have done in the table there, as to which of those relate to our core service delivery and which of those relate to specific and direct impacts of the pandemic on services. And the reason it's important, as members will know, is that we are hoping to recoup all of those increased expenditure and income losses, which are shown there of 2.2 million and 4.2 million respectively. We're hoping to recover all of those from the Welsh Government Hardship Fund. When we produced this report, we didn't have any indication that Welsh Government were looking to support the Hardship Fund past the end of September 2021. But since then, we have had confirmation that they are looking to support that fund to the end of the year, to the end of March 22, albeit on I guess more stringent terms in terms of claiming some of those costs and income losses. So they've revised those terms quite significantly, and I guess most significantly there'll be a tapering effect on some of the areas in terms of claiming those full amounts. So we just need to be mindful of how that plays out over the next 6 months. So really the core focus for us as a finance department at the moment is on the core service delivery deficit, which is forecast of £2.5 million. And the main reasons for those are outlined, I think, on page 26 of the pack. And just briefly, those are made up of a children's services pressure of £1.1 million, mainly due to demand pressures coming on stream. And similarly, in adult services, we're seeing a forecast deficit of 536,000, largely as a result of the need to recruit additional staff due to demand. Our transport and passenger transport unit is forecasting a deficit of £470,000, primarily due to the fleet maintenance pressures there, and due to the size of the fleet increasing at the moment. Our additional learning needs service is forecasting an overspend of £830,000 for some of those complex needs arising within schools and some of those placements that we're making outside of county as well. And finally, in terms of our pressures, Landlord Services is showing an overspend of £158,000 being forecast. primarily due to those commercial income targets. I think finally that the important thing to note as well is that those pressures are being supported, as it notes there, by outperformance in collection of council tax of £500,000, and the revenue budget is continuing to be supported by £2.2 million of expenditure being met from the capital budget. So we're eligible to fund revenue costs from capital receipts where those meet the terms of doing so from the Welsh Government guidance. I think clearly that's not a sustainable way forward, and we're looking at that in terms of the medium-term financial plan and we move forward. But I think it's important that members note that that is propping up the revenue budget at the moment significantly. So I think, Chair, I'll leave it there in terms of the overall position, but I know my colleague Dave Loader wants to come in and just talk to the specific areas for this committee. So thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Davis. Yeah, Mr. Loader, welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, John. Good morning, members. Dave Loader, Finance Manager. Yeah, what I will quickly do is just go through the outturn position of the services that fall under this select committee portfolio. I'll keep it brief because I think we are running short on time. So for this portfolio, the forecast overspend is 2.623 million. Now, as John mentioned before, a lot of that is related to COVID expenditure. So of that £2.6 million overspend, 1.997 million relates to COVID pressures. Of those, 866,000 is expenditure related and 1.131 is income loss. As John mentioned just now, we are now fairly confident that those costs will be offset by Welsh Government funding. As he mentioned, we've been given further funding from October to March to offset some of these costs. So as far as we're concerned, that's very good news. Obviously, we have got some non-COVID related overspends of £626,000 within the area. That is still a considerable overspend that needs to be managed, and finance officers and budget managers will be looking at budget recovery plans through to year end to try and manage that. So briefly, Chair, I'll run through the report. I'm just wondering whether this, because of the issue we had with the report in the slide deck, is it worth me sharing my screen? So we're looking at the right report. Yeah, let me just try and do that then.
Yes. Thank you.
Right, so this is a report. So I'll just quickly run through each area. So our facilities and fleet management department, we are showing a £551,000 overspend on that, and we can see the different areas that make up that department. Schools catering, we are seeing £81,000 overspend. As you can imagine, COVID has had an effect on the uptake of meals. This is one of the areas now that we are confident will be funded through till year end. We've got an overspending on building cleaning of 25,000. That's down to general equipment repair and replacement. I think I've had an update on that since month 2, and that has now reduced considerably, so that shouldn't be seen as a pressure going forward. Passenger transport, all this is non-COVID related, so this is a pressure that will be managed, will have to be managed going forward. We have £181,000 overspend in our passenger transport unit. We split down into 3 areas. Home to school, we've got an increase in vehicle financing costs of £57,000, and we've also got an increase in staffing costs. External commissioning, we've got a reduction in income from concessionary fares, and we've also seen an increase in contract hire prices, where, for example, contractors have handed or operators have handed back in contracts, and we've had to pay extra to put new contracts on. And then private hire, we've got a shortfall of 38,000 due to reduction in external contracts from this September. I think John mentioned in his narrative about the overspend we're seeing on transport. Our fleet maintenance budget is looking at a £263,000 overspend. This is a mixture of a historic budget pressure that we haven't been able to manage, but it's also been added to by the fact that our fleet has grown over the last 18 months, not just because of COVID, because those costs we can claim back from Welsh Government, but in general, our operations have changed, so our vehicle numbers have increased. This has put pressure on the department. As we know, cost of spares, etc., are increasing as well, so that's just added to the burden in our transport department. Neighbourhood services, a £346,000 overspend was reported in month 2. Our highways, street lighting and Sutra department were actually forecasting a break even at month 2, but our waste and street team were forecasting a £346,000 overspend. This is all down to COVID, and we are confident that this will be wiped off by year end. Placemaking, highways and flood in total department is at £576,000 overspent. You'll see there a large overspend in car parks. This is a mixture of reduction in pay and display income, but also civil parking enforcement income. Again, this can all be attributed to the COVID pandemic, and we are hopeful that will be funded by Welsh Government. And then this has been offset by an underspend in highways, development and flooding, where we are seeing underspends on staff. Again, I think it has been mentioned in the conversations earlier about the problems we are having with staffing at the minute and filling posts. If there is a good side to that, it does give us underspends in budgets that can be helped to offset overspends in other departments. Just moving through quickly, policy scrutiny and customer services, about £52,000 overspend. That's mainly down to a shortfall in income within our community hubs, which I think is mainly down to a shortfall in library income. But the majority of the rest is down to increased staff costs, whether it be increase in demand or the inability to meet staff vacancy factor savings within the budgets. People in governance, small underspend, mainly down to again staff vacancy savings in that department. And moving through to resources. So finance, quite a large overspend of £756,000. You'll see there that is mainly down to an £888,000 overspend in revenues. The majority of that is down to an overspend that we're seeing in housing benefits. Now, this is linked to the homelessness and the B&B issue. This year is going to be funded by Welsh Government, but this is basically down to the fact that we can claim housing benefit subsidy against the B&B costs, but the actual subsidy we can claim is limited. So although we are offsetting the B&B costs, when we go back to DWLP to claim back that subsidy, it's capped at £97.50 a week for accommodation. Now, if you can imagine, some of these B&B accommodations are costing us circa £58 to £60 per night for accommodation. So you can see there's a large shortfall in funding. Again, this is going to be funded by the Welsh Government funding this year. It is a potential pressure going forward if the levels of homelessness and the B&B accommodation isn't reduced. Moving on to council tax, there's £146,000 overspend there. Some of that is down to salary costs, overspending salary with the budget has been removed due to restructure. That has been covered off by this underspend in finance below. But you also see there that there's an anticipated shortfall in summons income of £79,000. Again, with the courts being affected by the pandemic, that's affected our ability to recover summons income. We are hopeful that will be covered off by Welsh Government funding as well. Just quickly moving through, as you see, we have a large underspend in finance of £122,000. there are some vacant senior manager posts within the finance department, which is driving that underspend. There's a comment there that the positions will be filled from September, so obviously we're now in October. Those positions still haven't been filled, so that underspend will increase when we report at month 6. I'll just pick up some of the main areas as well. So moving through to commercial and corporate landlord, we have an overspend of £352,000. Investment properties, £50,000 overspend. Our investment in Newport Leisure Park, so even though we're returning a £350,000 surplus of income over expenditure, that is unfortunately £50,000 below the budgeted level of surplus that we anticipated to make. Obviously that shortfall can be attributed to the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, so we are able to claim that back via Welsh Government. And we also see that Castlegate Business Park is actually reporting a break-even position. Moving on to Landlord Services is a £97,000 overspend. We have a shortfall of income of £142,000. That's a mixture of lost rental income because of the vacant spaces in our mega offices, and the inability also then to recharge service charge costs back to those tenants. We are also seeing overspend in supplies and services, but it is offset by, again, £51,000 savings in vacant posts. We are hopeful that the majority of this income will be claimed back from Welsh Government. Markets, quite a large overspend predicted at month 2 with markets. I think this will improve through till year end. We're seeing quite a large shortfall in income at the moment, A, down to the pandemic, but B, because of the disruption that the market hall refurbishment had on traders, we actually reduced the stall charge. So those two things attribute to that overspend. Most of this will be claimed back from Welsh Government, but also there is talk of putting prices back up in the market to recover some of those costs. And then moving through quickly, there's no issues on any of this. If I just take you quickly through to capital. Again, John mentioned earlier on, sorry, just find it there, that it's very early in the year, the month 2 report to give, sorry, excuse me, to give an indication of how our capital budget is going to be spent. A fair amount of the capital programme probably falls within this portfolio. You know, since we did this month 2, we assumed at month 2 that we would be a break-even budget. Obviously, as you're aware, things may have changed slightly since then. You know, we have material price increases. You know, we have issues with the supply chains and the deliveries of materials, etc. And also we've got the you know, the labour shortages in certain sectors that could impact on our capital programme. What we will do is have a clear update on that when we report to members for month 6. Okay, and I think probably, Chair, that is probably where we'll end, and we're happy to take questions. Thank you.
Can I ask a question, Chair? I'm going to hand some, I don't think, are we?
Thank you, Mr. Luder. I had trouble unmuting then. Yes, Councillor Easton, I was just going to ask if we're going to have a raised hand facility in the chat bar. If not, you can just indicate in the chat bar yourself if you'd like to speak. I must say that the information I have in front of me is the same as you've just worked through. So, oh, there we are. We have the raised hand facility in the chat bar. Thank you, Hazel. It's the same as I have. So I think it's probably dated on the website, because I took a look at that. Anyway, Councillor Easton, you have some questions.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's not my lack of understanding of the figures, but a lot of your figures are based on what you've not gained because of COVID, which I understand the problem. Particularly schools catering. You're saying 81k over. I won't go through them all. Just pick a couple. 81k overspend because you haven't had current levels of use. It seems a bit peculiar to me that because you haven't used them, you're losing money. But more particularly, car parks, 719k overspend. Could you explain that a bit more, in as much as car parks are supposed to be cost neutral or self-funding or whatever you want to put it, yet you're showing a big overspend on them. The car parks haven't been used, there's been no income. What will be the impact of that 719k on maintenance of, well, I understand maintenance of roads and things like that, which do come from car park charging. Perhaps that could be explained a bit more for me. Thank you, Chair. And then I'm going to have to leave you.
Thank you, Councillor Eason. Who would like to respond to that?
Nobody.
Mr. Davis or Mr. Lovedown?
Ah, right, David.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Eason. Quickly on the catering point, it's not basically it's the loss of income. So we are budgeted to hit a certain amount of paid meals take up to hit our budgeted income target. With the pandemic, with the way things have been, with the way meals have been served in our schools, which has been in a classroom, which means it's affected the menus that we can provide. All that has obviously hit the amount of paid meal take up, so that hasn't hit our budget. So obviously you are right, the less meals we provide, we haven't got to buy as much materials, but obviously the paid meal income helps pay for the staff costs, the overhead costs, the heating of the building, etc. So if that paid meal volume isn't to a certain limit, then the section overspends. Sorry,
so basically a budget within a budget for maintaining that service.
Yeah, so the catering budget is a net income budget, because we are expected to pull in income to cover off the cost of that service. If we don't put in a certain level of income, then the cost is there's a cost pressure on the budget.
Okay, lovely.
Okay.
Car park.
Car parks again. The car park income, as you say, goes to offset costs, road safety costs, traffic management and road safety costs within the highways department, but it's still a net surplus budget. Now that net surplus budget is probably around £1 million. So we do need to have a certain level of pay and display volume in order to hit that target. Now, obviously, the pandemic has hit the amount of people that have been going into our towns, and that has hit the income that's claimable. Yeah, the outcome of low volume means that there's a budget pressure on the authority.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Eason. Has anybody else got any questions? Don't see other raised hands in the chat bar. I think you went through that report so comprehensively, it was quite easy to follow. I have a question about the waste and speaking. Obviously, now that social distancing is not required as it was, is this going to make a big difference to the actual cost of that department? Because we all got used to seeing the white van following the lorries. Obviously, the drivers and staff had to social distance. So I'm assuming this has come to an end, or have other arrangements been made?
Yeah, I can come on that. I don't know if Carl is still in the chat. He might be able to add more detail. But as far as I'm aware, the social distancing additional vans will be tapering off now, because the social distancing guidelines have allowed. There's no need for those additional vehicles. That overspend that we've highlighted at month 2 would have been for the cost up to probably September. They're no longer needed, so that cost up for the first 6 months will be claimed from Welsh Government, and there won't be any additional costs going forward through till year end, so that won't affect the waste outturn position. Okay.
Yes, thank you for that. My other query looking through was the civil parking enforcement. I understood now we've got some staff back working. I mean, they were redeployed at one point. they're all back working in the team now, and are you able to say that, you know, exactly the shortage there, you know, the overspend there might be looking on the decline?
Yeah, again, the budget for civil parking relies on the issuing of fines. You're right, Chair. Staff were either redeployed, or we had some members of staff on the sick or shielding. I think we are back up to maximum capacity for staffing now, so we should see the issuing of tickets improve. Other issues that we have had, the capability of staff to do their job is, we do have, whilst the pandemic was on, there was guidelines to clean the machines. I think it was 2 or 3 times a day. That was taking time, staff time from patrols back into the car parks, which was affecting income. So with the full complement of staff, we are hopeful that it will improve. And like you say, we'll get have a clear update on that in for month 6.
Thank you. I know the civil parking enforcement team, they do talk to people before they put tickets on. They try to encourage people to park considerately, but it doesn't always work. But I'm just mindful that they were busy doing other jobs. Okay, do we have any other questions? Oh, Mr. Davis, you've got your hand up here. Invite you to speak.
Thank you, Chair. Let's start with, is my camera showing?
It was, but you've gone off again.
Try once more.
Yeah, there we are.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. I guess, as is often the case when I get to this point in the financial year, sometimes probably described as a bit close to being Scrooge, I think, given my role as Section 151. But I think it's just an opportunity, I think, coming off the back of the month 2 report. And before I sort of step into what I was going to say, is just probably just you know, it's a massive offer of thanks, I think, to John and Dave and the finance teams. You know, this is as much as the first item and what we've talked about in terms of the pressures that the pandemic's placed on services across the board. I think it would be suffice to say that the pressures on the finance teams have been pretty extraordinary as well. Navigating the claims into the hardship fund with Welsh Government is not an insignificant task, which has obviously been added on to a lot of the complexity that you will have, of course, understood by what Dave and John have been through with the forecast. So, you know, they need to really be commended, you know, for that. I think just in terms of a bit of a take in stock and moving forward, I think John in his opening remarks was just sort of highlighting, I guess, the significant reliance that there's been on the COVID hardship fund through the last financial year, and obviously for the first 6 months of this financial year, and where Welsh Government, to their credit, have obviously backed up you know, the promise to ensure that Welsh government has been suitably funded, to ensure that local authorities are suitably funded for those impact of COVID, both in terms of income loss and pressure. So, you know, that's featured right through the report, and without that funding, I think you can probably imagine what things would have looked like. Pretty dire is probably a gross understatement. So we've had obviously the real benefit of that funding coming into play. We've got a couple of significant risks just that I wanted to talk about. You know, first off, in terms of the COVID hardship fund, the arrangements and in fact the level of funding coming from Welsh Government is going to start to reduce and drop and taper down for the last 6 months. We've only just very recently had the revised guidance from Welsh Government in terms of what we're able to claim for, and the finance teams will continue to work that through. And I guess from a 151 perspective, I'm looking for that comfort to make sure that certainly for the current financial year, what you're reviewing today, that we have that level of comfort that we will continue to recover monies for that loss of income for those costs that we're bearing. So that's the first hurdle to clear, and that is a risk. I think Welsh Government beyond that then have made it quite clear that you know, certainly through the Treasurers group that I sit on with WLGA and senior Welsh Government officials, there is no expectation that the COVID hardship fund in its current form will continue next financial year. I think what we will see is Welsh Government looking to incorporate some funding into core funding, which I guess through the smoke and mirrors of the settlement will feature in the settlement announcement in December. And then what I would hope to see on top of that, because some of the impacts that we've talked about this morning and to now, I think there's a recognition that some of these issues are just not going to fall away immediately. So if I take that point on car parking income in terms of footfall return into town centres, car parking income getting back to where, you know, we would want it to be, probably more so in terms of leisure centres, in terms of leisure centre income. You know, we still have social distancing in place, and I don't think that's going to disappear anytime soon. That affects the amount of people that can obviously be accommodated in our leisure centres, has an impact on the income that we can generate. So with the rug in effect being pulled on the 31st of March with the hardship fund, we're going to need to work very closely with Welsh Government to understand what funding streams they're putting in. The earlier session talked about homelessness. That is a really good example. You know, there is a policy commitment with the Minister and Welsh Government of maintaining people being kept off the streets. Now, we have been significantly funded and continue to be significantly funded by Welsh Government to enable us to do that. So the question therefore is, well, what happens on the 31st of March when we step into a world where we don't have the COVID hardship fund? What funding will be forthcoming in that regard? So these issues present quite clear financial risks to the council. And I just wanted the committee to just sort of understand that. So as we head into the budget round, that is one clear risk. You will also be aware that when we strip away COVID from the budget monitoring across the board, there is still an underlying significant overspend, not so much within your portfolio area, although some of it is being felt. A significant amount of that is in adult social care, children's services, ALN. Very heavy pressure that is not being covered by the COVID hardship fund and bears heavily on the council's finances. So we have a whole set of challenges that we're going to have to grapple with in the current year in terms of managing down spend, and then obviously the not insignificant challenges of obviously putting a set of coherent budget proposals together for next year. So I just wanted to just give you that sort of broad understanding, and into which the month two that John and Dave have taken you through, that it's appropriately couched, and you get a feel for, I guess, what's ahead and some of the challenges that we're going to need to encounter, some of the risks that we're going to have to manage and mitigate. But Chair, I hope that's helpful to you and obviously to the rest of the committee.
Yes, Mr. Davies, thank you very much indeed for that, because we've been kept fully informed all through the pandemic, and the offices have worked tirelessly to present these figures to us, and sometimes it's been very, very much not knowing what's ahead and how much money we're going to get. You know, thanks to Welsh Government, we've had lots of money from the hardship fund. We all appreciate that. But when you're putting together a budget, I know how hard that can be when you're faced with these sort of unforeseen circumstances and constantly reacting and moving on. So thank you for your for that information, for your forecast of what's ahead, and thanks to the officers as well for all they've done to the whole team throughout this pandemic. I have Councillor Linda Guppy wants to ask some questions. Councillor Guppy.
Thank you. It was just clarification, because I was led to believe in a previous meeting with the car parks that we were going to receive a grant to offset that. So is the hardship grants just coming in one pot, or because obviously this report is presenting that we're in a deficit for car parks, so I was led to believe that we were going to get a grant for the car parks, and I raised it previously in a previous forum, because I know that Monmouthshire Council have partnership, are in partnership with other areas, shared shared income or shared profits from that car park. So just can you explain a little bit further, because I'm a little bit confused on the report regarding the deficit with car parking.
Yeah, I would like to respond to that. Councillor Guppy. Mr. Loader.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Guppy. So we have a deficit in our car park budget. That's because the income is down because of the pandemic. I think when you mention grant, it's probably that relates to the COVID hardship fund. Now the hardship fund is split into two areas. It's expenditure. There's also income. So where authorities experience loss of income, we can claim that via Welsh Government. So in short, the answer to your question, there won't be a deficit on car parks because we are anticipating the Welsh Government will cover it off. But also your additional question about some of the projects that have profit shares with us, because we are able to reclaim that income. I'm fairly sure we'll be able to pass that shortfall onto those organisations, just as if we were operating pre-pandemic, say in 1920, because we'll be able to reclaim that income off Welsh Government. I will have to check with senior officers, but I'm fairly sure we'll be able to pass that on.
Thank you, Mr. Is that helpful, Councillor Guppy?
Yes, I was led to believe that it would be passed on because you've got a written agreement in view of the percentage of shares towards it. It's just that it's been portrayed that, you know, we're in a deficit for that, but actually we're going to get a grant for it. So thank you.
Thanks very much. Okay, members, I think we'll move on now, and I thank the finance team very much indeed for their attendance today. You sat through the whole meeting, and it's you've been very patient waiting for this budget monitoring, and we look forward to the next one. As we know, this is budget 2, so obviously you're well underway now to organising the report for the next one, and we look forward to receiving that. And thank you all indeed much again. Right, thank you, members. We'll move on to item 6. It's to consider a request. This is purely to consider a request from Councillor Val Smith to table an item to the next meetings. She's done some extensive work with officers regarding a burials and cremations member report. So I'd like your views on we'll discuss the report if you'd like to discuss the report at the next meeting, and I will invite Councillor Smith to just to introduce the report, and then we can take it from there.
Yeah, very briefly, Chairman, it's been a long meeting for you. My interest in this service was triggered as a very young woman having an awful experience. So personal experience, and then many years ago, standing by one of our little chapels in a neglected state in one of our cemeteries, became aware of well, we're all aware then, the concern, the cost of the service of burials. Yes, my research is just purely from reading and being aware. You had 2 dominant chains. There was excessive expenditure over the years since I started looking at this issue, and I'm grateful to Councillor Harris as well, because we had a chat about this. There has been an awareness of, shall we say, I don't like the term exploitation, but excessive charges, 2 dominant chains, the lack of scrutiny, the lack of training for this service. You can become a funeral director just like that. So I wonder, is this a service that Monmouthshire could provide for the residents? A seamless service that could take so much pressure off. We have an adjacent authority providing, well, Cardiff provides an excellent service for their residents. We would also, as an authority, need to consider the impact on our social justice agenda as well. We have a crematorium. So personal interest initially, but awareness of huge expenditure. Certainly now you cannot but be aware of the pressure to buy your funeral plan, this, that and the other. There is forthcoming legislation, and I think I'd like members to consider, well, whether they think it would be appropriate to Monmouthshire to consider offering this as a seamless service for burials, cremations, etc. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Right, members, over to you. I've read it through, and yes, it is a very important report, and I think it would be beneficial to place it on the agenda of the next meeting. Does anybody wish to comment or state otherwise? What I would also,
sorry, Chair, if I may, I'd just like to say I'll be in support of adding this to the next agenda or a future agenda item.
Thank you, Councillor Hahn. Yeah, Councillor Harrison's hand up.
Same for me, Chair. I know Val's put in an awful lot of work here, and I think it'd be most sensible for us to consider it in much greater detail. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rog.
Okay. Yes, that sounds as though nobody seems to have a contrary opinion to that. So I would like to suggest that we also send a copy to, and maybe invite to the meeting, the Cabinet member who is actually our representative on the crematorium committee, the Gwent crematorium committee. I think that might be helpful.
Who is our representative, please, Chairman?
It was Jane Pratt, I believe it still is.
Right, thank you. Yes, I remember that committee. It has character.
Just might be able to add something to it for us. Okay, so that's agreed, members. Thank you for that.
Thank you, members.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. So we'll move on now to confirm the minutes of the previous meeting, which was held on the 29th of July. Do we have any objections to the content? Or is everybody happy with it? Can I have a proposal and seconder to accept it, please?
Move, Chair.
Move, Chair. Councillor Jahan.
I'll second that, Chair.
Councillor Edwards, thank you. Everybody happy that I accept the minutes? That we all accept the minutes?
Yes.
Yeah, no. Thank you very much indeed for that. We don't have an action list, currently have an action list, so we'll move on to Strong Communities Forward Work Programme. You've all got a copy of this. There's quite a lot on there. We are going to be, I'm just putting up my agenda now, on to go to look at the Forward Work Programme. There's quite a lot on there, but we could, here we are. It's been suggested that we add on flooding. It's already on there, scheduled for the 18th of November to be confirmed. Given some of the comments this morning, I think that would be very good to try and move that into the one of the forthcoming agendas quite quickly.
Support that, Chairman.
Thank you. So we have our next agenda, that, and to be confirmed CCTV, a strategic equality plan, that's all for November. So I think we've got quite a lot on then. If you look at the list further down, there's quite a lot on there that we will be reviewing in the next few months. So unless anybody's got any particular requests at this stage, I think we'll just accept that. If Hazel wants to add anything, I know she's multitasking this morning.
Just wanted to say, Chair, there's been a few changes since the work programme was actually dispatched with the agenda, and I think you might need to have a workshop on flooding, a single item workshop.
All right. Okay. Yeah.
It's going to be a discussion at some.
Yeah, that sounds good. Okay, I think Hazel's disappeared.
Sorry, Chair, hovering over the mute. Yes, I think perhaps a workshop on flooding would be a good idea. Single item workshop.
Yeah, okay, fine. And of course, sorry, somebody commented then.
But I think it was me saying yes, because I know that Woodside is so vulnerable.
I'm just switching between ModGov and Teams. I thought I'd lost it.
I'll turn off, Chairman.
No, it's all right, Councillor Smith. Right, okay, and of course we've got our forthcoming workshop, our highways workshop, which perhaps we could have a look at the date of that, and then we've got the Cabinet and Council Forward Work Programme. That's just for information. Date of time next week, Thursday the 18th of November. But we have our workshop on highways, which I will just mention briefly if I can find the date. Just to remind members of its importance.
19th of October.
It's the 19th, Chair.
Thank you. I meant to find that date earlier. Right, 19th of October. So we will be meeting again then. And I thank you all very much indeed for your attendance this morning, your contributions. It's been a long meeting, but I hope you've all found it beneficial. I certainly have, and I hope our officers have also. And enjoy the rest of the day. And I look forward to seeing you again remotely on Zoom at the next meeting, or before that at the workshop. Anyway, thank you very much, and thank you to Hazel and the officers who have supported us this morning. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Chairman.
With us, so
I think this has been one of the better meetings. Thank you very much indeed for chairing.
Thank you.
Get better.
It's your contributions that count.
Yeah.
See you all soon. Thanks,
My
everybody.
voice held up. I'm quite pleased about that.
Go put your feet up now.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye now. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.